Welcome back to the Sampan Viking on China channel, and it's a earlier welcome back than I would have normally anticipated, it being only 24 hours since the last video was put out. And I don't intend to make a habit of spamming either the Sino Defense Forum or YouTube with multiple daily outputs. It is simply that I think circumstances at the moment are a little bit special, and so it warrants a little bit of extra attention. First of all, before we start, I must say a big thank you to all those that support this channel. For the first time ever, the last video on the subject of has US abandoned Taiwan received over 100 views in less than 24 hours and 2 new subscribers. Very small beer, I know, compared to the mega main channels and for the China support channels, which tend to be smaller than many others. But for this little baby channel of mine, that is quite an achievement, and I am incredibly grateful to everybody who has supported it, and hope you will continue to do so. And I will do my utmost to create content for you that justifies that attention and time. This is a follow-on from the video of yesterday, and this is covering the areas that perhaps I didn't get a chance to. I didn't want to make the video too long or too winding. This is to do really with not so much where this is all going long term, but where this is going short term and the immediate ongoing events between China, US, and Taiwan as they are happening day by day, rather than a longer term strategic outlook for it. And this is itself, quite an interesting area. We are seeing a huge amount of activity by the Chinese Air Force inside uh, the Taiwanese Air Defense Identification Zone. And it seems, plus there are lots of articles being produced by Global Times and some very stern statements coming out of the Chinese Foreign Ministry, basically saying, don't push us, we're not bluffing. And other commentators have said, well, is this message getting through? Because Washington is notorious for, misreading such things or thinking that nobody would dare to challenge them. Maybe, maybe not. I think most people have people in places that do understand these things. Whether or not it gets through to the placemen in the political sector is another matter. Now, what I think is really interesting about this is that we are looking at some of the dynamics in the actual relationships between the major players. Um, and I'm also minded to look at other earlier previous events. And I'm looking specifically at Afghanistan, where we saw an uptick in activity by the Taliban as a way to pressure a planned withdrawal by the US and to make sure it went sooner rather than later. And I do wonder whether or not we are seeing something similar from China against the United States in this. The realization that America is not prepared to spend its blood and treasure in the defense of the island, and so now upping the ante just so that to push the point home to the independence elements on Taiwan, and also to get it a tacit admission from the US, so that the entire dog and pony show over the Taiwan Straits can sort of quieten down in some way. I think that is very, very likely, just looking to get to where the new normal, the new reality is, without all this song and dance, which is the inevitable part of any shift in geopolitical stance. It has to be said is that there are elements in these relationships which do tend to get overlooked, and this comes back to what I was saying yesterday about how do we get from where we are to a situation where America gets a chance to put its new policy, its new strategy in place. It's still difficult to see, and I think China is going to be trying to play blinders that actually get its objectives without triggering or giving an obvious reason to the US to trigger that response. Again, with all of these things, you have to assume that, or realize really, that there are people on both sides who fully understand the game, who fully understand the moves, who can anticipate what this is all about, and nobody's going to get caught really with their pants down. It's simply the reality of the ability to maneuver within the confines of that reality, and this, I think, is what we're going to be seeing now. And I would say at this point also is that it brings into stark focus, I think, very soon, that there is a big divide in this equation, which doesn't often get talked about at all. It's usually ignored. And it's a very simple reality, is that the biggest divide in the whole Taiwan question is not between the People's Republic of China and the Republic of China, which is the formal name for Taiwan, in a legal sense. It is the divide on the island between those that identify as the Republic of China and the separatists that identify as an independent Taiwan. That is the biggest divide of all, and that the divide between the Republic of China and the People's Republic of China has now shrunk to such a degree, I think you would struggle to find significant differences in view, in outlook, even in policy, in so many critical areas. And this, I think, is a key component as to why there is an impetus, certainly in favor of Beijing and against the interests of Washington. The other part of this is in terms of saying, well, how does China manage the situation from here, is to say, well, we do have a blueprint. And that blueprint is in the shape of Hong Kong. And you only, I'm sure nobody is unaware of the events that have affected Hong Kong over the last few years, and how those events have been brought back down and pacified. And I think even at the time when Hong Kong was going on, I was saying to people, I have a funny feeling that Beijing could stop this right now, much earlier in the cycle, without letting it run on. But they are using it as a petri dish, effectively, to see how the how the US led guerrilla action against Chinese rule is going to be operated, because the same things will be set up for Taiwan, and I'm sure there's not very much left in the playbook now for the Americans that hasn't already been tried in Hong Kong, and how easy it was to actually defeat it when they got serious about it, and without having to resort to force and troops on the streets or anything like that. So I'm going to make a prediction, and I'm going to say is that as part of this process of putting pressure on the United States, on part of upholding the one China principle, in which the People's Republic of China is the official China and sovereign over all other parts of China, including the Republic of China, the island of Taiwan, I think a national security law for Taiwan is going to be issued by Beijing in the not too distant future. Very similar to the one that was issued in Hong Kong. They will say that they are entitled to do so. It is part of maintaining sovereign integrity, territorial integrity, and sovereignty. And it will have many of the same provisions that the Hong Kong national security law has had. And this will effectively put the advocates of independence, both domestic and foreign, on notice that from that moment onwards, the law is against them, and that when reintegration of Taiwan into the Chinese mainland occurs, is that the people that have been contravening those laws will be called to account, and those laws will have already have been broken, and so the offences will already been committed, even though Beijing didn't, it wasn't in formal control of the island at that time. I think look out for this. I think this is going to be an important first part of the play. And secondly, we are seeing enhanced movement of aircraft around. I suspect that we are going to start seeing aircraft encircle the island, and forcing a no-fly zone for non-Chinese aircraft. So again, if we see any US aircraft trying to land, military aircraft trying to land on the island of Taiwan, they will be challenged, and challenged robustly, to the point where there is a very good chance they may even be shot down if they persist with trying to land. This, I think, is the kind of pressure that now China is going to apply. And the biggest pressure, of course, building inside, as people can see that the United States, because it will come out, is no longer prepared to defend the island, that the popularity of the independence movement will wane, and the popularity of the Republic of China, faction the Kuomintang, will actually rise again to replace, and this time put the island definitely on a political course for reunification. There is also a final chance that even if there was a last-ditch attempt at independence, it wouldn't necessarily be the mainland that fired the first shot against it, because the main opponents of independence are actually the Taiwanese, the Republic of China military, the Kuomintang, on the island of Taiwan, and they may very well, under those circumstances, before the People's Liberation Army get involved, actually take a military coup and take over the island, and then put things back onto to maintain the integrity and sovereignty, because they have no interest in not being Chinese and not being part of China. Not often talked about in the West. It's often forgotten and certainly not well understood. For those of us that do look at these things, it's not a difficult thing to call that they would not take it lying down. It's not what they want. So I think this is the kind of thing that we are now going to see. We are going to see China, the People's Republic, tightening its grip around the Republic of China, not necessarily in a offensive way, in terms of threatening the island, but what they would say is a defensive way, maintaining their sovereignty and keeping foreign interference out, and encouraging what they call cross-straits compatriots, the loyalists of the Republic of China, to ensure that the situation is stabilized. And I think a national security law would be something that might actually be accepted by the Republic of China as something which is an important piece of maintaining the one China principle. There are other things going on as well. I'll briefly mention these, although I didn't want to go on for too long. There have been the power cuts in northeastern China, and these are quite interesting by their own right. Part of this they talk about as being the result of trying to move towards carbon neutrality, like everybody else, and reducing reliance on coal. But I actually wonder whether or not there is a secondary motive to all this. I mean, I have no doubt that these have occurred as a result of natural forces, natural shortages, and all the rest of it. But the Chinese are very good at taking a situation, as they did in Hong Kong, and saying, well, okay, let's not just move straight away to deal with this. Let's study it, because what we have a chance to do now is to study the resilience of our power generation and distribution system, and put this in the context of the embargo that was discussed in the last video. I think you can see where I'm coming from with that. A few years ago, there were massive rolling, in the United States, there were massive rolling cuts. I think it knocked out the entire east coast of the country. I'm not sure. Now, I have to admit, I don't know how the Chinese grid is configured, the relationship between generators and distributors, what kind of grid it is, how local, how national, etc., etc. But I could imagine that with all the permutations of getting the fuel to the right places, getting it distributed, if there are outages, can those outages be reduced, so be managed in a way that they don't roll out of control, tripping district grid, province after province after province, in rolling cutouts across the country, just localized. And so I think they are taking the opportunity for resilience testing, also for obtaining fuels as well, and the understanding that if there was an embargo, they may very well have this problem to deal with in a far more serious way. And so better to do the tests now, and to even start to make sure that they've got the stockpiles that they need where they know they're going to need it, in order to limit the impact of it, should it ever come to that in the future. Anyway, that's all I really was going to say today. It's still a lot longer than I expected, so my apologies for that. But it's an exciting subject. There's a lot going on, and I'm sure that things are going to develop fairly quickly over the course of the next few months, and so it is a subject that I will be coming back to discuss with you again and again and again. For those that enjoyed this video, please tick like. If you haven't subscribed, please do. It's free and it does help the channel to grow. If you'd like other people to hear what I have to say, hit the share button. If you want to make a comment or ask a question, please do in the comment section. I will be pleased to answer where appropriate to the best of my ability. I look forward to you joining me for the next video.